So I've had comics and comic books and comic book heroes on my mind. But in order to help you understand why they've been on my mind lately, I need to tell you a little bit about what I do for a day job so that you can understand why they've been sort of rolling around and I've been trying to dig out something that I can feel is there and that I think maybe can help the people who I spend my days trying to help. So, I'm the captain of Moonshots at a place called X. X is the Moonshot Factory for Alphabet. So it's the part of Alphabet where we try to make new businesses for Alphabet. And you've probably heard about some of those places, and I'm going to tell you about some of them just so we can warm up a little bit. Then I'm going to tell you why it's hard to make those things, and you might not at first suspect what's actually hard about making these moonshots. And then we're going to go into some of the superheroes and what I've been thinking about, and then we can come back to X and to taking moonshots, and then I'll answer some of your questions. So, self-driving cars. This is a good example of a moonshot. In order for something to be a moonshot, there has to be three basic things. There has to be a huge problem with the world that you want to have go away. The fact that 1.2 million people a year die in car accidents, that should count as a big problem with the world. $1 trillion a year is wasted sitting in traffic. We can do better than that as a species. Surely we can do better than that. Then, number two, there has to be some kind of radical proposed solution for making that problem go away. Because if your proposal is let's spend more money than anyone else has ever spent, let's work harder or stay up later than anyone else has ever stayed up, but basically doing what everyone's already tried to do to fix the problem, that's not a moonshot. So you gotta be weird. You have to propose something, a way of coming at the problem that no one's ever tried before. And then number three, it has to not be completely crazy. You could tell me that, war is a big problem and your radical proposed solution is time machines. Okay, I agree about the war part. I guess we could probably solve most wars with a time machine, but that's why the third part is important. You have to explain how we're gonna get started. You don't have to prove to me right at the beginning that we're gonna succeed, but you have to make it seem like we could at least take the first step or two. There's some kind of experiment that we could run that would tell us whether we can take the next step. And assuming you don't have that for the time machine, then it breaks down at that point. That's not a moonshot for us. Self-driving cars had all three of those characteristics, which is why 9 years ago, just as X was starting, we did that. I don't know if you've heard of our stratospheric balloon project, Loon, but this is another one. There are almost 4 billion people in the world with little or no internet connectivity. That counts as a huge problem with the world. Trying to solve that problem by making satellites that were a thousandth the cost of a normal satellite and hanging them under balloons and solving the problem that way, that's certainly weird enough, different enough to count as a radical proposed solution, whether or not it's going to work. And then, okay, can we do that? Well, it doesn't break a law of physics. It probably won't work, but let's get trying at it, and then as soon as we figure out how it won't work, we can throw that idea away and get on to the next one. That was 6 years ago, and this project is still going. Google Glass, I assume many of you know about Google Glass. That's something that we made at X. This was one that is sort of close to my heart. I really like these what-ifs, these ahas. Usually great moonshots have this characteristic. So if you look at a wind turbine that weighs on the order of 500 to 800 tons, all of that weight is just so that these arms, usually 3 arms, can go around in space. And almost all of the power that comes from one of those huge wind turbines, because it's a lever, right? Almost all of the energy is produced by the wind pushing at the end of the lever, not by the middle of the lever. So you think about these tiny little pieces of metal at the end of these long arms. That's where all of the energy, almost all the energy, is coming from. You have 3 tiny pieces of metal going around in space, and everything else is basically just to hold it there. Being slightly unfair to wind turbines, but basically true. What if you made the piece of metal and you just had it go around in space and you didn't have the other 99% holding it up? Wouldn't that be awesome? Sounds crazy? That's what a moonshot should be like. Something that sounds crazy but has that like what if that seems worth trying. So this is an airborne wind turbine. It looks like an airplane that people don't get on, basically, and it's tethered to the ground so that it can send the energy that it's producing back down this tether. This is Wing. This is self-flying vehicles for package delivery. We believe that in the next 30 or 40 years, we're going to come to see that there's a huge amount of friction left in how physical things are moved around in the physical world. And just like boats or planes or trains or automobiles, the Pony Express, the introduction of each of those things radically changed society. We think being able to have something that fits in a bread box just show up to you wherever you are within a minute or two would radically, for the better, change society. We would, among other things, move from an ownership society to much more of an access society, because you don't have to stockpile the things you think you might need, because in the moment you need it, it'll just come find you. And this is actually rolling out right now. Healthcare is an area we spent a lot of time in. So turns out that there are a few interface points to your body where you could kind of wear something. You can put it in your mouth, you can put it in your ears, you can put something on your eyes. Well, actually, people do put stuff on their eyes. They put contact lenses there. So because your body is talking biologically with your tear solution all the time, if you could put a computer and sensors onto a contact lens, boom, you would have an awesome wearable body monitor. I mean, left as an exercise to the reader, how to put a computer and sensors onto a contact lens, but we'll figure that out. That has the characteristics of a moonshot. These are the sorts of things that X spends its time doing. That sounds really fun, doesn't it? It turns out this is unbelievably hard and not for the reason you think. You need to be good at technology to build these things. You need to be good at understanding users in order to be able to build these things. But there are a lot of people who are good at technology. There are a lot of people who are good at understanding users. There are a lot of people who can take something out into the field and test it. I'm not trivializing those skills, but by themselves, that's not hard. But you have to be weird in order to do these things. And being weird is hard. It's harder than being a great programmer. Being the right kind of weird. That's like a superpower, to be the right kind of weird. And we don't feel great being weird around each other. It's the very thing that I want everyone at X to be like, and yet that's the thing it's hardest for them to be. When I say, hey, let's try this thing, I bet it won't work. Most people, their first, second, and third thought is, why would I do that? I'm gonna look like an idiot. You just told me that I'm gonna do it, and then it's not gonna work, and then you're gonna be mad at me because it didn't work, and my peers are gonna be mad at me because it didn't work. How am I gonna get a bonus? How am I gonna get a promotion? I just don't see what's in it for me to be weird. I do not see what's in it for me to run an experiment. All of the power, like at the end of that lever on those long arms in the wind turbine, all of what's hard about this is getting people as a group to be weird together, to be the right kind of weird together. That's what has caused X to be particularly special and to make a surprising amount of progress at building these moonshots. So I happen to have a Ph.D. in artificial intelligence, and I sort of care about artificial intelligence. I'm interested in that, but I'm a culture engineer. What I'm obsessed with is why people do the things that they do. When I say to you and to all of us, let's go that way, every business in the world, everyone runs this way. If you've ever been in any business, you know what I'm talking about. There's the lip service, which is painted onto the poster at the front door, and nobody does those things. Everybody's just running in some other direction. This is what we tell people to do, and these are the paths of emotional least resistance in the organization. It does not matter what you tell them to do. just like the kids. The kids don't care what you tell them to do. They're not listening to you. They're paying attention to what you do, but they're not listening to what you say. They're following their own emotional paths of least resistance. And what I'm obsessed with is, why do they go that way when we ask them to go that way? And how can we pull these two things together and get people to do things which are a little unnatural, to act as a team, to be weird in the right kinds of ways to produce unexpected results? Because unexpected results are not going to come from being normal. They are not going to come from everybody doing things by the book. Which brings me to superheroes. So, Marvel's had this resurgence. I'm sorry if you're a DC fan, but most of my points are going to be from Marvel. I just happen to be more into Marvel characters. But don't worry, I will hit or DC first, just so you guys can get it out of your system if you happen to be a DC fan. There's been this resurgence, particularly with Marvel, over the last decade. People are really into superheroes right now. And I've been thinking about why. And I think that they have more to teach us than we've been acknowledging. So let me take you on a tour of some of the things that have struck a chord with me about them. And the first one is from Superman. What is your kryptonite? You guys remember Superman and kryptonite, right? Everyone presumably remembers kryptonite. Kryptonite is not something that is an area of development for you. You cannot get better at kryptonite by just hanging out with the kryptonite a lot and just like toughing it out. It's not like push-ups, where if you just do it enough, it'll be better. The whole point of kryptonite is that it's that thing which for you, you're not going to get over. That's what kryptonite is. And I used to think Superman was so dumb. This was like half of my problem with Superman. He's a bit straight-laced, honestly. But leaving that aside, the kryptonite thing killed me. What would he do? He would walk into a room, and he would scan the room with his X-ray vision. And he'd be like, looks okay in here. A little bit of a black spot over there. Can't really see inside that lead-lined box, but I'm sure it's okay. Like half of all of Superman was driven by that thing. And I thought that this was just so against human nature, so irrationally stupid that I couldn't read Superman comics. But I actually think the opposite now. I think it's a deep comment on human nature. Do you know what your kryptonite is? If you don't, you should be obsessed with finding out what it is. But most of you probably kind of know what your personal kryptonite is. Superman knew what his kryptonite was. His kryptonite wasn't really the kryptonite. His kryptonite was his blind spot. He just wasn't looking around for the kryptonite. If you know what your kryptonite is, but you're not spending your time trying to avoid it, how are you going to make sure that it doesn't drag you down as you're trying to save the world? That's actually what's important. Not just that you name your kryptonite, but you look out for it and you avoid it. And that, I think, we mostly all do kind of badly. And that's what the Superman comics are trying to tell us. My personal kryptonite is lists, recipes. I'm an experimenter. I cannot follow directions. So an IKEA cabinet is like the death of me, because I would rather go hungry than follow the recipe. And so you can imagine how the cabinet comes out after I've tried to build it, because I have to experiment. I have to change something. It's stupid. I know that it's stupid because a recipe, by definition, is someone who can cook better than me, tried all the variations. It was like, this is the good one. Of all the things nearby to this, this is the best one. I'm like, I'm going to try something new. I just have to. That's my kryptonite. Which means that there are a whole bunch of jobs that I can't do very well. But at least I know that's my kryptonite, so I avoid them. This is another one of my favorites. I think we know this intuitively, but it would be nice if we said it out loud more. Superheroes don't all look like this with capes. I mean, when they're in the middle of saving the day, sometimes they do, but mostly, especially when we're learning about them, that's not how they look. They look like Peter Parker. They're misfits and they're orphans. And the color of their skin, their age, their gender, it doesn't tell you who the superheroes are. The comic books have been trying to tell us this for like 70 years, and we're like barely listening at this point. You cannot look at some plump middle-aged Indian woman and be like, nope, she doesn't have superpowers. You don't know. You don't know, no matter what they look like, whether they have superpowers. That's one of the most basic points in comic books. We're not really listening. We're barely listening. And when someone comes in an interview and they're awesome, they look you in the eye and they tell you how awesome they are, and you're like, I'm going to hire Bob. Look how confident he is. And he says he has great EQ. I'm sure he does. Maybe. I'm not saying we shouldn't hire Bob because of that, but it doesn't prove anything. That's not where superpowers come out. That's not how superpowers come out. People with superpowers, by definition, they tend not to be soaring through the sky at the beginning. They're like hiding it, sometimes from themselves. How are you going to get it out of them? How are you going to find out that they have it? My wife Danielle is sitting over here. She used to be a research scientist. Now she's a novelist. I don't even think she thought she was going to be a novelist 20 years ago. My head of operations, I remember he used to run $10 billion a year of business for Google. He got on a video conference with me in a suit that he had sewed himself. And I was interviewing for a chief of staff, which really wasn't at all obvious to me why he should have the job. And he said, I can't explain it to you. I was just born to do this job. And I said, okay, come on down. And he quit that job and he came to work for me, and that was 5.5 years ago. And he is unbelievable. He was born to do this job. Sometimes you just have to experiment. You have to try things. You have to let people sort of find that in themselves. So I think that we could do a better job, all of us, in society, and certainly when we're looking for weird people who can help us productively be weird, to have a little bit of faith that the person in front of us might well have a superpower, even if we don't know what it is, even if they don't know what it is at first. This one really gets my blood pumping. Look, the good guys have robots. This killed me. Even when I was a kid, this killed me. It's not just that the bad guys have robots. Dr. Doom's robots look unbelievably like Tony Stark's robots, don't they? It's basically the same robot. They were called Doombots, if you remember your Fantastic Four. They're identical. Good guys have robots, bad guys have robots. The robot isn't the good or the bad thing. Robots are not good. Robots are not bad. Technology is not good or bad. AI is not good or bad. I'm sorry if that was a spoiler for anybody. That's not what's good or bad. Technology is a lever for our minds and for our bodies. But what boulder we move and where we choose to put that boulder, that's up to us. We seem to be obsessed with the morality of technology when technology per se itself does not have morality. What we should be a little bit more obsessed with is the morality of the people who are making the levers and the morality of the people who are using the levers. But I would ask, since I'm standing in a school right here, how are we doing teaching the world's future Tony Starks or Victor Dooms the ethical choices around building and using technologies? I'm willing to bet that that is not one of the dominant threads in this or any high school. But it's interesting that we want to moralize afterwards about the technology itself, but aren't actually spending our energy trying to train our children to think about how to build and deploy technology in moral ways. I think we'd be way better off if we leaned into that second one instead of trying to sit there with the lever and tell it that it's bad. It's not helping it. The lever doesn't care, and it's going to be a lever whether we like it or not. You guys remember your X-Men? What was great about what Dr. Xavier did? It was cool that he could read minds and even make people do stuff. That wasn't what was great about him. He was a teacher. He made a school. He made a school for weird people. They were called mutants. But he understood this deep truth about people, humans, and he understood that mutants were people, that if you let people let out their difference in an uncontrolled way among people who would misunderstand them, it would end in tears. Not good. But if you could create a place where weird people could come together and cheer each other on just a little bit for being different, they could practice being different around each other, and they could start to see their differences as a great thing, an empowering thing that made them bigger than if they had all been the same. That would be something special, and that's where the X-Men come from. So, sorry to rip it off a little bit, but that's what X is. That's exactly what I've tried to make. I'm sorry I'm not bald or in a wheelchair, but hopefully you can look past that. We've tried to make a place where people can come and we say, we don't want you here because you're like us. We want you here because you're not like us. If our entire job is seeing things differently, you know that process where you're driving down the road and the orchard just looks like a bunch of trees, and then there's that moment where all the trees line up? That's the feeling you ought to have. You keep turning a problem. You turn it and turn it and turn it till that moment where it all lines up, and what looked impossible all of a sudden looks like maybe it would be easy, or at least doable. But turning a problem like that, it's not like driving down the highway. You need to see things differently, and that means you need people who come from these different perspectives. And then they need to not think that they will be laughed at when they teach the people around them to turn the problem in these unexpected ways or approach it from these unexpected perspectives. So what we've tried to do at X is to create an environment where we can attract these people and we can support these people. And it sounds a little too good to be true, but I think that X has unbelievable traction in the world, is doing a lot of good in the world, and simultaneously is making these people who might have felt for a long time like they hadn't quite found the right place for them, now they have. And I would like to believe for any of you, especially if you feel like you haven't found your place yet, whether it's X or somewhere else, it's out there for you. Don't get normal. I mean, you can always become soulless later in life if being weird doesn't work out for you. Why start soulless? Be yourself. Go to like 120% of yourself, and if people don't get it, go find someone who does. That's how I would live my life. Kingpin is the bad guy for Daredevil and for Spider-Man. It's easy to pound the table, or it seems to be for a lot of people. It's easier, anyway. You can get faster results. Giving you a nice, gentle philosophy is not the right way to get you all out of this room in the next 10 seconds. I would scream. And a lot of people, unfortunately, learned that lesson to much too great a degree. CEOs are not known for being gentle and thoughtful, which I think is really sad. There are basically three ways to motivate human beings: love, fear, and greed. You have to pick one of love or fear, and then you can throw in greed or not. But you can't pull the love lever and the fear lever. Those are just the only two you can't pull at the same time. And most kingpins, most titans of industry, they pull the greed lever and the fear lever. But fear teaches us self-preservation. And that might be a really good short-term way to get some progress, but you're not going to get something really exceptional from fear. Greed teaches us the world is a zero-sum game. Probably better than fear, but you still aren't going to get something really incredible from that. Love, which is a sense of passion and a sense of purpose, that's where teamwork comes from. That's where loyalty comes from. The reason that people don't pull the love lever more is you have to place a bet on the better angels of our natures. And most people, I'm not sure, believe in humans enough to do that. And then you have to be very patient and very sincere about the bet you just placed. And most people aren't either that patient or that sincere. But I think that the comic books teach us that this is not how to win. This is how to win in the short term. Be a jerk. Be a bully. You get what you want in the short term. But that is not the way to make things great in the long term. That is the road of real failure. And that if you bet on love, in the long run, the comic books tell us that you'll actually win. And I'm going to go to my grave believing in that. And so far, I think X has actually made really good money placing that bet. Presumably you guys know Tony Stark and Bruce Banner when they're not in their superhero look. You know, superheroes aren't just superheroes when they're using their power. And there are times, this happens all the time in comic books. The comic books teach us that sometimes your superpower is not what this moment calls for. In Avengers 1, if you guys have seen the movie, any of you seen the movie? Surely, good, all right. Marvel's doing their job. I think it's Captain America asks Tony what he would be without his suit, and he says, a genius, billionaire, playboy philanthropist. You don't have to use your powers all the time, even if you have superpowers and even if you know what they are. Sometimes being creative, being funny, being wise are more important than whatever your superpower is. Make a tool. Choose which path to take. Figure out that person to bet on that looks on the surface like the wrong person to bet on. Should you fish or cut bait? Those moments are as important as whether or not you can turn into a big green monster. And the comic books tell us that over and over again. And I love watching people find things in them that are unexpected. Let me give you a story from X. When we started that stratospheric balloon project, the balloons would go up and they would come down pretty fast. Since we were launching them near Google's headquarters, they would go up, they would end up in the Central Valley of California, which is where everyone was growing weed at the time, and it wasn't legal yet, so there was a lot of like shotguns and please don't come onto my property without the please. And that was where our balloons landed. And we had these special forces guys whose job was to go get our balloons back. And there were a couple of them who really looked like they were like, you know, put the knife in the teeth and jump out of the plane without a parachute just for fun kind of guys. And when they went to get these balloons, there was one weapon they took with them every single time. It was the most important weapon they had. And I was flabbergasted when I found out what it was. It was a bottle of wine. They knew that going into the Central Valley and trying to like outgun these guys, that was just not a plan. Especially Google, it's like not an armed militia. But a little please, a little thank you, a little hey, I brought you a bottle of wine, that's so cool, hope I didn't like ruin those nice smelling bushes you have with my balloon, went so much farther than them using the skill they had just spent all this time developing. And believing that that's possible for other people and working to find that in yourself is part of what comic books teach us. Many superheroes suffer from this, probably none more than Spider-Man. But it just seems so unfair. He was working relentlessly, just tirelessly to try to save New York, and all he did was get yelled at. Like, constantly. That sucks. That was sort of like the backbone of Spider-Man. Why did he keep doing it? But part of what I've taken away, especially recently, is that's not our job to worry about that. If you see someone who isn't you, a company who isn't you, you don't really know whether they're the good guys or not. They say they're the good guys. They always tell you they're the good guys. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It's a little hard to tell. We could all be a little bit more open-minded, though, honestly, about whether they are. If it's you, you know whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. But even if you're a good guy, Spider-Man made a mess sometimes. And honestly, he got yelled at for a lot of things that weren't his fault, but he broke some stuff while he was saving people, and a little bit of like, hey, thanks for saving people, wish you hadn't broken that train. Like, that's not crazy. And we're so busy empathizing with Spider-Man, we sometimes forget that there was a little bit of collateral damage along the way. And what's important, if you're Spider-Man, if you're trying to make the world a better place, you just gotta not get psyched out by this. Just let the world say what it's gonna say about you. If you believe that you're helping, just put your head down and help. Make the world better however you can. The world's gonna say what it needs to say. In the short term, it will probably be wrong and really unfair to you, and in the long term, the right things will happen. And the comic books tell us that too, that part of the reward is just doing the right thing, even if the newspapers always say the wrong thing about you. And they also do tell you that in the end, even the newspapers, even the public sort of softens its view over time if you actually are saving the world. So focus more on saving the world and don't get quite so focused about how people see you, I think is one of the things that we're hearing from the comic books. Wow, it's too dark to see. Anyone know Jessica Jones? Yeah. So this is true of most superheroes, but you know what a superhero would be if they didn't have personal problems? Unstoppable. Any one of them. Go pick a random comic book, open it to a random page, and you will discover the entire plot is moved forward by the fact that they have issues. It's like mommy issues, daddy issues, brother issues, baby issues, but they have issues, and it's the issues that cause them to do stupid stuff, i.e. be human, and that's what moves the plot along. It's never like, oh, I've got my fireballs, but they're just not quite strong enough. Like, that's not really how comic books work. The truth is that whatever your superpower is, the comic books are telling us you're not limited by the strength of your superpower. You're limited, I'm limited, by our areas of development, by our personal issues and how effectively we're working through them. I have a coach, actually 2 coaches, and I have a hauntingly long list, a 3-year work plan. At my age, I have a 3-year work plan of all the stuff I still need to fix so that I can be better, so that I can not be Jessica Jones. I'm not an alcoholic, but I have plenty to fix. When I was in high school here, I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't even know which way was up at the time. And I'm somewhat more compassed than that now, but only mildly. This is what we have to work on. What are you good at? What are you bad at? Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you stick your foot in your mouth? Why do you alienate people all the time? Because that's what moves those comic books forward, and we all think that we're pretty much like the good guy in our lives and everyone around us is acting kind of weird all the time. But you're the catalyst in a lot of those moments. I'm the catalyst in a lot of those moments. And understanding what those are and working on those is at least as important as understanding your superpower. So I'm really big into failing. I'm happy to talk to you more about this if you like. But on the topic of failing, the whole idea of failing is you run an experiment. Hey, what if we did this? What's under this rock? And you look under the rock. You run the experiment, and if it doesn't work out, fine. We learn something, do something else. But in the moment of crisis, when you're in the middle of a maelstrom, that is not the moment to fail fast. Failing fast is an intellectual process of understanding something new about the world, of having learned something. But when things are as crappy as they could possibly get, that's actually when you shouldn't fail fast. That's when you learn who your friends are. That's when you learn what your team is made of. That's what the comic books tell us about each other and about ourselves. Never let an insurmountable foe go unused, because those moments are the moments that actually are the crucibles that can make teams great and that can cause people to learn a lot about themselves. So fail fast, as I might love to talk about, this moment where everyone is gonna die, that's actually the moment to have the most faith and the most optimism that we're gonna be okay if we're a great team together. We can always fail fast later. And then, I know this isn't a comic book thing, but I'm going to end on Frodo. I doubt I deserve it, but the nicest compliment I ever received was someone who knew quite a bit about power, about how to get it and about how to misuse it, who said that I might be the only person he'd ever met who absolute power would not corrupt absolutely. Now, I don't particularly think he's right about me, but it got me thinking about Frodo. I think why we care so much about The Lord of the Rings and about the story of Frodo is that's the ultimate superpower. Being able to have great power and still be a great person almost breaks what it means to be a human. I would like to believe that I would, but most people don't seem to be able to do it. But we should at least recognize that that is the hardest thing to do. And when you see anyone locally in a school, on the international stage, behaving like Frodo, having great power, and acting like an actual grown-up, we should go crazy to support that Frodo when we see them. Because, by and large, that's not how it works. It's the people who take the ring and act like the big man on campus, abusing that power and being corrupted, whether they were evil beforehand or not. Those are the people who get most of the accolades. That sucks. We should actually spend our time finding and celebrating the Frodos. And I think that that's what freaks people out about technology, too, is technology is helping to condense power and money into the hands of smaller numbers of people. Fine, that by itself is neither good nor bad. I mean, there's inequality issues. But from an ethical perspective, that's just heightening our Frodo issues. And we should recognize what a precious thing that is when someone actually acts like a Frodo. All right, I'm going to give you one or two examples of how at X I try to use these things, and I'm going to open it up for questions. But, maybe so that we can do some questions, I'm going to give you just this one little tidbit. There are going to be runners on both sides here if you want to find microphones. If you go into any office, a big office anyway, it'll have these jewel cases, big boxes with glass, and have the prototypes in them. They're so proud of their prototypes. We made that. And sometimes they'll have, mostly the prototypes, like unbelievably clean, like dust has never touched the thing. Occasionally, they'll have this sort of like, this was the first prototype we made, and it doesn't look as nice, huh? And then there was this prototype, and then this prototype, and then this prototype, and then, it was an iPhone by the time we were done. I challenge you to find a place in any jewel case, anywhere you visit, where the prototype looks like that, because that's in our office lobby. You know when something looks like that? When it's been used. When we actually went out in the world with it, and we learned, and we were wrong. When you show the world that you really care about something, you say what about it you care about. And when you show a clean prototype, what you're saying is, we make stuff. We like making stuff. We're very proud of ourselves when we make stuff. We're proud about learning stuff. And it seems like a tiny thing, but if you say that one thing in your lobby, and 10,000 other examples like that, that's what pulls people's emotional paths of least resistance so that they start doing the things that you're actually asking them to do. You have to create social norms through tens of thousands of tiny little signals that say, we actually do want you to be different. We actually do want you to be weird. We actually do want you to run an experiment where the experiment is risky and thoughtful and then be intellectually honest about the outcome. We don't care whether the answer is yes or no. If you pre-decide what the answer to the experiment is, it's not a real experiment. That's this.